calcium and other mighty minerals, which literally can be essential, which are truly essential, but the way in which you get this calcium and magnesium, for example, is super important, and it does matter. If you're just running to the supplement shop and you're, buying calcium supplements, or going over to your favorite Walmart or wherever you get supplements and buying calcium, it's not likely going to be helpful for you. And I'll explain that here in just a bit, because it's crazy. In fact, it may even be harmful if you take a calcium supplement, because it's very easy to overdo it. You can actually deposit calcium in all the wrong places, including in your blood vessels, causing heart attack, stroke, all kinds of craziness, high blood pressure, all these things that you do not want. They can even cause unwanted kidney stones. Calcium oxalate is the most likely and most prevalent type of kidney stone out there. And if any of you have ever had a kidney stone, it's crazy bad pain. And for the dudes, I know you're like, oh my gosh, worst thing ever. They compare it. I think it's got to be a guy who wrote this in the book who says that it's kind of like labor pains. Well, it was written by a guy. A guy doesn't know what labor pains are like, but it's a lot of pain. Kidney stones are no good, and they can be potentially caused by calcium supplementation. So we're going to talk all about calcium, why you need it, how you can get it in the best way, and what other important nutrients are required, necessary, and super beneficial to take alongside calcium so you can optimize your bone health, your heart health, and really do things the way that nature would have it done, because calcium is essential. It is literally the most abundant mineral in the whole body. Calcium, who knew, right? But 99% of it is located in the bones. Also a little bit in the teeth as well. But interestingly enough, many people are under, as far as the functionality of calcium goes. In fact, calcium, when you need it, generally speaking, it comes out of the bones and goes into the blood and the other places like the muscles, for example. In fact, muscle contraction, as it were, that enables you to move your body and provide this amazing action called locomotion, right? That enables you to walk and do all the things that you like to do. For me, it's surfing and biking and running and hiking and just doing my daily walks 3 times a day after meals. I couldn't do any of that without calcium. It is so critical for muscle function. And also that smooth muscle, the type that surrounds blood vessels, need calcium as well as your heart, that thing that beats each and every day, thousands of times, that you don't even necessarily notice, recognize, appreciate. It needs calcium. But as I said earlier, it doesn't need too much. It doesn't need too much at once, because then you can deposit calcium into the walls of those blood vessels, causing inflammation, which can contribute to heart disease. You may have heard of this fancy test called the calcium score, which is literally a measure of calcium in those unwanted places. We're not talking about calcium in the bones. We're talking about calcium in the blood vessels, especially the coronary arteries, the coronary vessels. And you don't want to have any calcium in there, in those blood vessel walls. And so if you have a calcium score, if you've ever had this fancy pants CT scan done looking for a calcium score, you want that to be 0 or as low as possible, right? Showing no deposits of calcium in those blood vessels, especially those ever important coronary arteries. And so let's get into it. Calcium is necessary. It is essential. It's important for all those things we just talked about, for the bones, for muscle contraction, for the heart. Each and every beat requires calcium. Also, it's interesting, calcium is a required cofactor for so many enzymes. It is imperative that you have calcium. In fact, if you don't have it or don't have enough of it, you can have problems with your blood pressure. You can have problems with your muscles, including heart contraction. You can have deathly, what are called arrhythmias, which are heart conduction problems if you have a condition called hypocalcemia, for example. But also you can have issues if you have hypercalcemia, which is too much calcium. So we're going to get into all the details. And just to give you a little bit of background, calcium is always better absorbed through your food, as opposed to taking a bunch of calcium supplements, which may or may not be absorbed, or may be absorbed too well because you're taking too much. And then you can get all those problems like kidney stones, constipation, calcium in the blood vessels where you don't want them, et cetera, et cetera. But things to think about that would have calcium would be some dairy-containing foods like yogurt, kefir, even milk, as well as my favorite, which are the fermented cheeses. Also, I love sardines. In fact, I found a sardine that I really like that's only high quality ingredients, basically sardine, salt, and extra virgin olive oil. And they got this thing at Costco. It's one of my favorite snacks, like shameless plug. If you like sardines, I throw them on top of salad or just eat them right out of the can for a healthy snack. It's so awesome. I love the olive oil in there. And you get really messy when you eat it. So try to have a utensil, because if you're just doing the finger food thing, it can be pretty messy. Also, you can find calcium in green leafy vegetables, broccoli, turnips, watercress, kale, of course. Nuts and seeds, especially almonds. Almonds are a great source. I drink almond milk. I haven't really had dairy milk in years, and I don't have any problems with dairy, but I just haven't really found that I need it. And I'm trying to avoid it, especially with my daughter, who's got autoimmune conditions that many of you know about, including type 1 diabetes. So we're trying to be no milk, no usual milk in the household. And so almond milk is kind of what we go to when we mix up our protein smoothies, which we do every day because we love to get our protein. And you can get also, who knew, right? Calcium from almonds as well. So how much do you need? Well, it depends, right? It depends on how old you are. If you're a young buck, you need more, right? Because you're growing, developing. You need a little bit less as you age. Kind of an average would be around 1,000 milligrams a day. Like I said, if it's somebody who's growing, a young person, or even postmenopausal gal, a little bit more than that. But make sure you do your best to get it from food. And we're going to talk about how you can be best equipped to get the calcium you need and not have issues with osteopenia or osteoporosis. And it's not as you think. And many doctors, sadly, they just say, oh, once you're in that sort of 50 and up age range, you just got to take supplemental calcium. And actually, I would say that it is very rare that you actually need supplemental calcium for a couple of reasons. One, because it's not absorbed very well. And if you just take a whole bunch of it, you actually could have issues like we talked about at the outset, right? Constipation, kidney stones, calcium deposition in the coronary blood vessels, places you just don't want it. And so we're going to talk about how to optimize calcium. But interestingly enough, I just wanted to share that most people don't know this because you literally cannot appropriately absorb calcium without one of my other favorite vitamins. This is my vitamin I speak of daily. Have you got your M, N, and D? Vitamin D, yes, it is. Vitamin D is essential to help you absorb calcium. So if you're not getting appropriate vitamin D, if you're low in vitamin D, which probably 80+% of us are, believe it or not, even in the summer, even some of us getting sun, we're still not getting enough vitamin D. I would recommend levels of 60 to 80 on a standard US blood test, 60 to 80, and that is uncommon. In fact, many of us are deficient. I do take vitamin D supplements when it's not summertime and I'm not getting plenty of sun exposure because I care about having sufficient amounts of vitamin D3, which is the cholecalciferol, which is that active form. And coupled with that is another really important vitamin called K2, which I'm just going to briefly talk about because most people just don't know much about vitamin K2, which is also kind of part of this 4-pack of vitamins and minerals that's so essential when you have calcium, vitamin D3, and K2, as well as magnesium together. This is like the quad that will give you that optimization of your bones, of your heart, of your muscles, and all those other important functions that happen because vitamin, for example, vitamin K is important for blood clotting. Vitamin K is important for healthy bones. It's also super critical. And most people have no idea about this because nobody talks about vitamin K2. Well, you all heard about K1. That's kind of the original one described for utility because of its helpfulness in blood clotting. In fact, that's why it's called vitamin K, because in the first journal I believe it was written up in was in German, the German language, and it was I forget the exact title of the article, but it started with a K. I think it was just talking about clotting and clotting spelled with a K in German, or the word similar to that. And so they called it vitamin K, and that was K1, which is essential for blood clotting. You can get that from a lot of healthy foods like kale, for example, green, dark leafy vegetables, kale, spinach, etc. Vitamin K2 is also super important, but most of us don't get enough of this one because it is only in animal products. It is not in the green leafy vegetables. It is in things like grass-fed beef and beef liver and organs, as well as grass-fed, for example, butter. The non-grass-fed doesn't usually have any sufficient amounts of vitamin K2. Also, fermented foods like sauerkraut can have K2. But looking at, they actually took ladies and sampled their K2 levels, and this was a combination of over 6,000 patients. And they found that most were deficient in vitamin K2. And when they supplemented with vitamin K2, they had a very positive effect on bone mineralization, because you essentially cannot do the proper bone mineralization, including the calcium, without vitamin K2. So K2 helps regulate bone density, the calcification process, and really the metabolism of calcium in your body is literally controlled by vitamin K2, which plays an essential role. And most people have no idea about this. But you heard about the D3 K2 combo. That is really important because vitamin D, especially D3, the active form, helps you absorb the calcium. And also the K2 helps you with that calcium metabolism. So having all these together is essential. And like I said, most don't get enough K2 because we're not eating enough grass-fed butter or organs, right? Like liver, etc. Or we're just not eating enough fermented foods. Okay. Another cool thing is that you can actually get your body, well, I should say the microbes, the microbiota in your gut and your intestinal tract to make vitamin K2 for you if you get a healthy gut. It's super, super cool, super important. Another reason to get a healthy gut, because as I always say, healthy gut, healthy life. And so most of us can benefit from vitamin K2. And as I mentioned earlier, most of us are deficient. It is only found in certain animal products like grass-fed butter and organs like liver, organ meats, as well as the sauerkraut and natto, which is, of course, the soybean variety, or miso, which is the soybean type that's fermented that you find in miso soup, for example, which I love so much. It's here in Hawaii. Pretty readily you can get that stuff. I haven't been able to find it very easily on the mainland, USA, but I love it when I can find it in Hawaii. Natto and miso. Oh, it makes me hungry even talking about it. But yes, you do need vitamin K2 and vitamin D coupled with that calcium. So important stuff. And so I'm going to just kind of, we talked a little bit about K2, talk about how vitamin D also is essential as a regulator of calcium, because when you have appropriate amounts of vitamin D, it increases your potential for absorbing the calcium from food. And it helps make sure the calcium gets to the right place. It gets to the bones and the places you need it, not into the lining or the walls of the arteries. And that's also an important function of vitamin K2, which I was talking about just a moment ago, found in, of course, the fermented foods, as well as the animal products like the liver, animal organ meats, as well as the grass-fed butter, for example. And I love that they also have that at Costco nowadays. It's in that dark green, kind of shiny package, grass-fed butter. I buy it each and every time. Oh, I got to share with the lady there this past week, in fact, here in Hawaii. And she's like, hey, have you heard of this kind? I'm like, oh my goodness, you have to buy this type. Grass-fed butter is hands down way better. It even tastes better too. I just can't tell you how much I had it tonight on some baked carrots with butter. Woo, it was amazing. But yes, grass-fed butter, as well as organ meats, as well as fermented foods, can get you the K2 that you need, which helps control this metabolism of the calcium, getting it to the right places like the bones, and not in the places you don't desire, like making kidney stones or getting in the blood vessels, causing heart disease and things like that. Because vitamin D and K2 are sort of the directors of this appropriate calcium process and utilization. So it's super cool, super important, but rarely would you need to supplement with calcium. In fact, I almost never recommend calcium supplementation, because you can get sufficient amounts from your diet pretty easily, as I described early on. Calcium is in so many things that we can eat, everything from dairy to sardines and salmon, tofu, natto, the green leafy vegetables like we talked about, broccoli, turnips, watercress, kale, and nuts and seeds, right? Especially the almonds like we talked about. It's actually pretty easy to get from the diet. And if you pay attention to your vitamin D intake, both in the foods like the fatty fishes, which is where I usually get mine, those sardines again. Also, I get local, fresh caught, wild ahi, which is tuna, and others. And I try to eat at least 2 times a week, have some sort of fish in my diet. And when I can't, I just buy these sardines over at Costco because they're great and they're less likely to give me that dreaded toxicity that you guys have heard about in a lot of the big fish, right? The big sort of mackerel and actually a lot of the tuna and others that can actually have significant toxicity because they eat other fish, right? They're the cannibals of the fish. They're high up on the food chain. And so you can get mercury toxicity if you have too much fish, too much tuna, for example. And so the smaller fish, like the sardines, don't tend to carry that same risk. And so, yes, just make sure you are getting enough vitamin D. And it's possible to get it in the summertime if you have a fair skin complexion like myself. If you have darker skin, you don't tend to absorb it as well and convert it into that active form of vitamin D3. And so you may need to supplement. I know I supplement at least half the year when I'm not in the sun of Hawaii Ne. And if you do choose to do so, make sure you do a D3. And this is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you take it with other fats, it's absorbed better. I sometimes will take it with a spoonful of olive oil, or if I'm just having some kind of fatty type food like an avocado or something, I'll take my vitamin D3 with that because like absorbs like. And so if you take a fat soluble vitamin like vitamin D or vitamin A, for example, it's going to be absorbed better if you have some healthy fats with it, like my favorite avocado, for example. And you just can't know what your level is. You can't guess. Even if you're a really tan person, you could have a low level. So you gotta look under the hood. And I would recommend, this is one of those blood tests that I would recommend getting at least every 6 months, checking a vitamin D level. Like I said, I always like to shoot for levels between 60 and 80. And that is really a nice level to shoot for most of us. And I would say most of us are sadly below that. In fact, I would say the overwhelming, probably 80% of the US is below this threshold, 60 nanograms per ml. And that's the, of course, hydroxy vitamin D3 level. And so in order to supplement, a lot of people need to take between 4,000 and 8,000 units. Of course, these are gel caps. And like I said, better absorbed if you take them with some fat. And I just cannot underestimate that potency, powerful, and really helpful nature of having sufficient vitamin D. Not only is it one of the best anti-inflammatories, it of course helps you absorb calcium. It helps you to be able to utilize, and it works together also with magnesium. It's kind of like this dynamic quad. I was going to say trio, but it's vitamin D3, K2, calcium, and magnesium all together. You got to make sure you have the right amounts of all of these things. And if you need help with supplements, you can always reach out to me. I love to chat about what I take. I literally take dozens of different ones and from all different companies. And I have sort of the tried and true that I've been using for the last decade or so. So I'd love to help you out. If you need help with that, you can reach out to me over on my Instagram, or you can email me. All those links are, of course, in the show notes, or just over on my Instagram, which is Dr. Thomas Hemingway, Dr. Thomas Hemingway. And I'd love to help you out because so critical to get sufficient vitamin D, right? We had all of this information finally come to the surface about how helpful it is for immune function, like during this recent pandemic. Those that did better and that didn't have severe outcomes tended to have higher levels of vitamin D. And that's what we're talking about, right? This ideal level between 60 and 80 nanograms per ml. And like I said, you got to check under the hood. It's so important. It's also really important for management of your blood sugar. In fact, this is one of the things that we focused on a lot with my daughter who has type 1 diabetes, because having appropriate vitamin D actually helps with blood sugar balance. Super, super important. And of course, like we talked about at the outset, super important for bone health and helping reduce the risk of osteopenia, osteoporosis, these fractures that folks tend to get later in life. Many of these could be prevented with adequate vitamin D3, K2 calcium, and magnesium. In fact, let me just give a quick little rundown on my favorite mineral, magnesium, because it is crucial in the process of both the bone physiology, because it's needed to help us with absorption of vitamin D, as well as the calcium. And that all works together to optimize bony function. And it's really at the top of the list of minerals that here in the US, we tend to be deficient in. And you can't just take a blood test, because that just shows the magnesium level of the blood. Most of the magnesium, just like calcium, is actually found in the bones. Over half of all the total body magnesium is actually in the bones. And it's super important there because it is cross-linking important structural proteins, providing this strength that we all want. And of course, lack of magnesium not only is just a disaster to our bone health, but it is essential in over 600 different reactions in the body. That's why I did a whole podcast on magnesium, and I called it something like Magnesium, the Mighty Mineral, because it is so important. For me, it's been life-changing, restoring my magnesium. I used to suffer almost daily from terrible migraines, and I found that supplementing with magnesium was able to put an end to almost all of that. I rarely get migraines anymore, but I do supplement several times a day with magnesium. And many of us don't know that we're deficient because our levels might say that we have adequate, and that's just a blood level, and that's not an adequate representation of the magnesium stores in our body, because most of which are found in bone, and also the functionality piece, which is just hard to measure with a blood test. But any of us that may be taking any type of antacid, whether it just be an over-the-counter one or one of the PPIs that we've talked about previously, which can wreak all sorts of havoc on the gut. I talked about that last week and the week before, PPIs and these sort of antacids, if you will. No good for the gut and no good for your magnesium levels, as well as, interestingly enough, you guys know I'm pretty much anti-grain and anti-gluten and try to avoid the big three, right? The processed grains, the processed sugars, and of course the seed oils, because these processed grains have a lot of anti-nutrients. The anti-nutrients, like the phytates, for example, which block, actually make it next to impossible for the important things like vitamin D and magnesium to get properly absorbed. And so those of us that are taking either one of these antacids, or that are using, or I should say that have any type of grains in their diet, especially gluten and these other grains which have phytates or phytic acid, these are acting as blockers to the absorption of these important vitamins and minerals like magnesium and vitamin D. They act as anti-nutrients, and now vitamin D and magnesium deficiency are among the two most common. In fact, I did a whole supplement chapter in my book, and I spent quite a great deal talking about vitamin D and magnesium, because many of us, in fact, the overwhelming majority of us, are deficient. And a couple of things that can happen if you're deficient in magnesium: of course, you can have elevated blood pressure. You can have heart rhythm problems. If you ever felt your heart kind of jumping around in your chest, that sort of feeling of palpitations. Many of these dysrhythmias can be caused by magnesium issues, typically low magnesium. Also, blood sugar imbalances and erratic blood sugar can be linked to low magnesium levels. Magnesium is that important. Also, if you have low energy, heck, did you know that magnesium is critical and imperative, and you cannot make energy, the so-called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is that sort of energy currency of the whole body. You cannot make it without magnesium. Magnesium acts as a cofactor. And any of you who may suffer from muscle cramps, many of us think, oh, it's potassium. Well, actually, it's more often magnesium that is the issue here. And so if you have restless extremities, you have crampy muscles, magnesium may be a thing that you need to replace and replenish. And I have found that it's nearly universally beneficial. I haven't found anybody that can't benefit yet from magnesium. It's actually pretty hard to overdose on. You'll have a bunch of diarrhea far before you'll ever overdose, in my experience. And so people will back off. And it also depends on what type of magnesium you take. If you're taking sort of the cheapest one, magnesium oxide, which I don't recommend, most of it is not absorbed, and you poop it out, and it can cause tremendous diarrhea. In fact, they do have milk of magnesia. and magnesium citrate, if you will, which has magnesium in the citrate form, which actually is supposed to help you have bowel movements. And so I take the threonate and the glycinate because they tend to be better absorbed. I love the threonate, magnesium threonate, that is, because it crosses the blood-brain border and really helps me a lot to kind of chill, take it at bedtime to help me sleep. It also helps prevent migraines. And I just find it to be that magnificent, mighty mineral that most of us could benefit from a little bit more of. And so magnesium, most of us want to get between 400 and 500 milligrams of elemental magnesium, and it's pretty hard to do without supplementation, I found, actually. But these things kind of go together. As I mentioned, magnesium is necessary for proper absorption of calcium. You need also vitamin D and magnesium to work together to help one another, so you get the adequate absorptive efficacy of both the magnesium as well as vitamin D. And of course, you want to avoid the things that block the uptake of magnesium, like the PPIs or the antacids, the proton pump inhibitors, the over-the-counter Prilosec and Prevacid and all these things. If you don't have to be on them, don't take these things long-term. They were never intended to be long-term, though they don't usually like to tell you, unless if you read that super long 20-page insert in the fine print, they'll say they shouldn't really be taken for more than 2 weeks at a time. And then so many thousands, even millions of people have been taking them for weeks, months, and even years. What a travesty. It wreaks havoc on the gut. Of course, it wreaks havoc on your ability to absorb the things that you need to absorb, right? We talked about last week the B12 deficiency, which is becoming increasingly common, largely because of these antacids, the proton pump inhibitors, for example, but also this wreaks havoc on your potential absorption of magnesium as well. Who knew? So magnesium, super, super important. It is the mightiest mineral, in my humble opinion, that we need so much, in addition to the calcium, which we all need, but most of us will not need supplementation. I found that when we optimize our magnesium as well as our vitamin D, that's D3, the cholecalciferol, the active form, as well as the K2, we can absorb the amounts of calcium that we need from the foods that we're already eating, whether it be the dark green leafy vegetables, the broccoli, the turnip, the kale, the watercress, those types of green leafy vegetables, or the nuts and seeds like the almonds, like I love so much, or almond milk, or even the dairy stuff like yogurt, milk, kefir, and the cheeses. I do like to have those strong cheeses. I just think it's so amazing. I don't really drink any milk, like I mentioned, but a strong cheese and a piece of some kind of amazing Italian meat without nitrates or nitrites, rolled up in a little snack. That's my favorite. But anyway, I digress. It's wanted to just really get out there the important facts about calcium, because most people will not require a calcium supplement once they start paying attention to their magnesium and their vitamin D3 and K2. Then they'll be able to absorb sufficient amounts, typically, that they won't have issues with osteopenia, osteoporosis, weak bones, and such issues that your doctor tells you about, but then he just says, hey, take this calcium supplement, which I found to most of the time make things worse rather than better, because it is not able to be utilized appropriately, because you need the K2, as we talked about, to get it into your bones, as opposed to putting it in your blood vessels where you don't want it, where it can cause heart disease. So I know it's a lot, and it's probably brand new for many of you, and you probably have had both doctors, nutritionists, and others tell you got to get your calcium. And I don't disagree, you got to get it, but you should really get it from your diet. Calcium supplementation is rarely beneficial, and I would recommend optimizing first your diet as well as your magnesium, vitamin D3, and K2 intake. Super important. If you want more on this, reach out to me, send me an email, message me on Instagram. You can ask me about the supplements I take, or just grab my book, because I do a nice little summary, a whole chapter on supplements in my recent book, Preventable: 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health, which is available now on Amazon. If you haven't got it already, it's literally available within a couple of days. You just can get it on Prime, and usually you've got it within the week, which is really, really cool. Make sure you share about it, and you tell me, and you drop a review over there, because I want to hear about your experience. I want to know what you're loving, you're learning. And so that is my mission, to share these things that are so critical to not only lifelong health, but to thrive and not simply just survive life. And so Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here, for being a part of the movement. So important to really understand how calcium works in the body. And I hope that I've kind of shared with you the basics of that, and that the best way to optimize it is not usually with a calcium supplement. It's with optimizing your vitamin D, D3 especially, of course, K2 as well. And of course, magnesium, the mighty mineral that it is required for proper absorption, utilization of not only calcium, but vitamin D, and of course the K2 we talked about. So those, I do recommend making sure you're getting adequate supplementation. If you're not getting in the diet, of course, try to get the calcium and these from the diet as much as possible. But I found most people do need a little bonus, a little boost from a supplement with magnesium, a supplement with vitamin D and K2. And so if you need help with that, reach out to me, and make sure you share, because most people have no idea about how calcium really works in the body. And it's not just about buying that calcium supplement. And in fact, most people could benefit more from not taking a calcium supplement. And I don't want you to have issues with kidney stones or with coronary disease, calcium deposition in your blood vessels. And so optimize the vitamin D, the K2, and the magnesium, and make sure you're getting the calcium from your food. Until next time, a big aloha.
Thanks for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss out. Aloha.